So, I have a question for everybody, or rather a couple of questions. I want you to think about the people in this room, think about the people in your life outside, and, are there people that I don't want to say dislike, are there people that you despise?
Because that's so much nicer.
It's not about nicer. Are there people that you feel a deep-seated sort of hatred for? Are there people who, maybe it's not even that, you just...
Don't get along with them?
No. I mean, yes, but not what I'm going for. People who you do not want to waste your time with.
Painters.
People who you look at and say,
No.
no.
Plebeians.
That makes sense. You joke, but I don't think you're joking. So, with that asked, the question is why? Why is it that you don't want to be around those people? Why do you hate those people? Why do you disdain those people? And the bigger question is, do you see them? See, the thing of it is that we, as followers of Jesus, there's this whole kind of perspective that we carry.
Where you at? John 3?
Mark 6. No, it's the wrong one, though. So there's a point where Jesus is out preaching, talking to a bunch of different people, and his mother shows up, Mary. Mary shows up, and people come to Jesus saying, "Hey, your mom's here. You should come talk to her." And he sits there and he's like, "Who's my mother? He's like, "I'm surrounded by my brothers, my sisters, my mother, as long as you're part of this." And this ends up being an important perspective that he offers. I've heard people misconstrue this as being like him being a jerk towards his mom, but that wasn't the point. The point was to illuminate the fact that familial ties in blood in and of itself are not actually as significant as the understanding that for us, when we look at the people around us, we're looking at our family. Because no matter how you look at things, we're all people. We all come from the same stock. Whether you believe that we evolved from an individual so many millions of years ago, whether you believe that we were all originated from the same two and carry the breath of God in our lungs, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. At the end of the day, what you run into is a story in which we all come from the same place, which makes us all brothers and sisters and so on. And we tend to believe the side of it where it's the two. The point is, though, is that what Jesus highlights in that moment is a perspective of us being family. More than that, when you look over the Gospels, you find Christ talking about the enemies of God. And it's interesting because there was a prophecy, I believe it was in Isaiah, where they talked about how when the Son of Man came, he would free the Israelites from, and he would be a war leader. And that's what a lot of the Jews were looking for. It's why Jesus wasn't overly accepted. A lot of the the Jewish people were looking for their Messiah to be a war leader because they believed that he was going to lead them out from under the occupation of Rome. He was going to come against the enemy of God, who was the Roman people, who were the enemies of the Jews. But that wasn't the point. Jesus didn't come to do that. See, he fulfilled that prophecy, which was a really interesting thing. I've heard people look at that prophecy and say, well, it didn't get fulfilled. It's going to get fulfilled at the end times when Jesus comes back. And it's like, no, you're missing the point. Because what Jesus did do was he came and he gave people the tools. He announced the enemy of God is Satan. And he's always out there doing his thing. And now you are given my authority, my power to cast him out, to circumvent the efforts of him and his people. His perspective was that there's only one enemy for God, and that is Satan. The people in this world are not amongst God's enemies. Even those who would willfully stand up on that side, he still doesn't see that. He still sees his kids. And for us, that can be really, really hard to see. It can be extremely difficult for us to remember the fact that, especially in the midst of people coming against us constantly, that they're still our family. And even though we don't like it, even though we don't like them, they're still our family. And the interesting thing about family that can be really problematic is that element of us that we run into on a constant basis, and that is compassion. See, when you see your family in distress, oftentimes there's a part of us that wants to help us, and we can turn it off. Like, we can absolutely find all the reasons in the world to say, I'm not going to help you. You were wrong to me, you did bad to me, yada, yada, yada. You know, here's my list of reasons for why I shouldn't help you. Okay? And now I'm not going to help you. You know, the fun thing about that is how stirred up you feel afterwards. Because it eats at you. You feel you want to help. Almost like you feel obligated at times. But you're right. You're absolutely right not to, you tell yourself. And it doesn't actually comfort you. You might be able to shut it off eventually, but the truth is it's still going to be there, just kind of lingering. See, the thing about it is that we're built to be compassionate. It's part of our nature. It's part of the way that God built us. I mean, even if you want to talk about it in terms of biology and altruistic nature being part of humanity, it's a normal part of us. That's not a common thing in nature. There are other animals that exhibit altruistic qualities. Not all of them, though. Most snakes have all the altruistic qualities of a rock. That can't be said for some things, though. It's one of the things that makes us unique, in fact. It's also one of the things that strengthens us in this world. Compassion is a strength. We oftentimes don't recognize it as that, and in fact, there are a lot of cultures and religions who view compassion, and a lot of mindsets and societies that view compassion as weakness. To show compassion is to care for another and to let the weak continue on. There's a very austere aspect to that, but ultimately it's crippling to the people involved. Because showing compassion is a strength because it helps draw up other people. It helps build around you. It helps build you as a person. And to exist within that and to utilize that and to be there, number one, is the joy that comes from showing compassion to another. The joy that comes from being able to give to the needs of those who need and to see that need alleviated. To give time, to give energy, to give whatever you can to help to benefit another person and to see them receive that and grow as a result. Whether it's growth, whether it's, a material thing, whatever it is, you get to see the alleviation of whatever is causing them strife. And that, at the end of the day, strengthens the entire community. And this is important, because the funny thing about those cultures that were so austere, you think of like the Spartans were funny because they were not like that. They were very, very much so trying to take care of each other. That made them one of the strongest and most terrifying forces on the battlefield at their time. Rome, for a long time, held similar values in taking care of their brothers and those who fought in their wars. See, the thing of it is that those are two forces that, even though there are thousands of years between us, we still know who they were. That was the indelible impact of their culture and their value for this thing. And yeah, you could say the other side of Spartans, they did lack compassion when it came down to picking their children. But the reality is that's true. But that's not really what we're looking at. So, one of the things here to look at is the value of compassion, the importance of it in a culture, in a society, because we're not really built to be like snakes or so many different types of reptiles. We're humans. We're a social creature. We're meant to exist in societies. And if our existence revolves around how we survive, or how best for us to survive as individuals, then we start losing the point and we start losing ourselves. We stop becoming people at that point. When you hear stories about like catastrophes that happen, like New Orleans, when New Orleans got wiped out by that hurricane and people turned on each other, there were literal cannibalism reports.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Ooh.
There were reports of cannibalism. People were trying to gun down aid helicopters. They were stealing like medical stuff and holding onto it, either
Looting
for
all the
themselves.
stores.
Hmm?
Looting all the stores.
Oh, this was after the looting. The looting happened, yes, but I'm talking when everybody was in a state of chaos. Well, people factioned off into little tribes and they started to start little gangs and things like that. It was a mess. But see, the funny thing about that is when we stand back and look at that, we don't see something glorious. We don't look at that and say, wow, those guys did a really good job of surviving.
Go them.
Yeah.
I want to be like that.
Instead, what we see are people becoming monsters. And that's what I'm talking about. See, the thing about compassion is the value of it, the importance of it, but also it's part of our humanity.
Yeah.
To exist without compassion is to cease to be human in so many ways, and to exist and to live as one who has no compassion is certainly a far cry from anything that Jesus illustrated. So, the first thing to say here is that with that is how do we fall to a place where we start devaluing or not seeing the meaning of compassion? Where do you get to a place where you don't look at it? And before we do that, I just, to kind of like certify this, the value, the importance of this, one of the scriptures that I was given for tonight is out of Matthew 9. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I'll put it this way. The entire chapter is literally just Jesus going around healing people or casting out demons or different things like that. If you want to read it, you can. It's literally just Jesus goes and heals this person. Jesus goes and heals this person. Jesus goes and casts a demon out of this person. They're all incredible events and miracles that Jesus did, But the end of the chapter is when it sums up why he was doing it. And starting in verse 35, it says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." Now, there are a lot of ways to look at that, but and there are sermons in and of themselves built off of what Jesus says right there. But the point is, the driving focus behind why he did what he did was his compassion on the people. See, when he looked around and saw these people, he didn't see monsters. He didn't see people who were rejecting him. And just to give some perspective, even more than that, the other passage we've got is John 3. And to read it, like some of us who grew up in church have maybe heard this ad nauseum. But starting in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." We know this. We know this all too well. But the problem with that becoming something that's so common is that it misses this really incredible next part, the rest of what he says to Nicodemus. "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light, because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what he has done has been done through God." Now, the reason I say that's incredible is because it cites a certain reality. He starts off talking about how he's come to save the world. God gave his only Son, and he's come to save the world. But more than that, he does that knowing the fact that people don't want it. People will choose darkness every step of the way. They'll happily keep the world the way that it is right now. The Jews proved that through the Pharisees when they ordered his sacrifice or his execution. And the point is that when he talks about that whole thing about this is the verdict, light has come into the world, but men love darkness. Jesus came and did everything that he did for the purpose that he did it, understanding that many would reject it. Because his heart was not focused on what he was going to get out of it. It was focused on doing this for others. And that's an important thing when we talk about compassion. Because a lot of us, I don't think all of us completely understand what it means to have compassion or even to define it. A lot of people will mistake it as, stop doing things. A lot of people conflate it with sympathy or empathy or commiseration. The definition of compassion is sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. Sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. It's a both thing. Not only an awareness of what's going on and that this person is in pain or distress, but the will to remove that, to fix it. And to understand that very clearly, there's no point where that's really focused on you as a person. It's all focused on the other person. Their distress, them being fixed. your part in that is the only part that's yours. It's not about what happens after, it's not about what happens before, it's not about who they were, it's not about who they are, it's not about any of those other things, it's purely this. They're in distress, I want to fix it. That's an illustration of what compassion looks like. When Jesus came and did his thing, that's where his heart was. It wasn't focused on the people. It wasn't focused on what he was going to get. It wasn't focused on him. He was going to suffer a terrible death. That's fine. Because what was important was the people who were being saved. See, one of the really hard things for us as followers of Jesus is that's a pretty high bar in a lot of ways. But it's also something that's completely natural. It's completely natural to want to help other people when we see them in pain and distress. It's also good to do it, and we all know that. So the problem is, how do we fall out of that? How do we get into these states of not caring or not wanting to or not wanting to be part into this? Well, it's actually that's also really easy. The first reason that we can easily fall away from that is, judgment. Another thing that can come out of it is self-focus. What are we going to get out of this? How are they going to respond? Trying to control the outcome. And the reality is that all things, in all circumstances, fear is usually the driving force behind why we would turn away from compassion. Because at the end of the day, there is no greater opponent to compassion than fear. When we think about it in these terms, if I see somebody who's in distress, and I decide that, and I notably want to help them, what's the greatest thing that could stop me? Well, who they are. Like, I could not want to be seen helping them. I could not want to help them because I'm afraid that they're going to turn around and attack me in some way. I could not want to help them because I'm worried that they're going to dismiss what I'm helping them with. They're not going to use it for the best. If they're asking for money, what if they just use it on something meaningless like booze or drugs or whatever. If I'm giving them my time, maybe I'm going to be wasting my time. The thing of it is that there are a lot of different things that will come into our heads when we're offered the opportunity to help somebody. Maybe they're going to hurt me for helping them. Maybe they're not going to receive my help. Maybe they're not going to like it. Maybe they're going to go another way. Maybe I'm going to screw it up somehow, and that's going to be the damaging thing, and I'm going to actually do worse for them. There's a lot that runs through our heads when we see these things. And the problem is that fear is one of the great things that can stand and oppose us in those states. It'll cause the most destruction because it'll cause us to not move. It'll cause us to sit back and say, I'm not going to do that. And it'll still eat at you. Again, we go back to that thing. It'll eat at you because it's somebody that needed help and you turned them away. And eventually, maybe your heart hardens, but until that point in time, you have to deal with that. And even then, if your heart hardens, that's not a good thing. If you get to the place where you can merely see people suffering and not care, That's a bad place to be. It's a bad look in general for people. And usually it speaks to some inner brokenness, something, or some quiet judgment. So, to be specific, the first thing that I'm mentioning are basically insecurities. How those can stop us in our tracks from helping other people. We're afraid of the reaction of the person. We're afraid of how it's going to affect us. We're afraid of how it's going to look. I mean, in the story of the Good Samaritan, we see an example where so many people saw this guy beaten and left in a ditch, and they walked past him. These were the kinds of people who would preach to other people, you should go help people that need help. And they looked at this guy and were like, I don't want to be seen with that. And it was finally the Samaritan who was the dirty person, the person who should be ashamed of themselves, who showed up and helped the guy. And of course, it's Jesus telling this story because the reality is that he recognized this one thing more than the priests of the time, and that was that it doesn't really matter what you look like. It doesn't really matter who you are. You can help other people. And what matters is that you help them, not that you look good in the process. A lot of the Pharisees and so on spent a lot of time looking really good. And we'll talk further about that aspect of this in a minute. But before we go there, to finish the point, they were afraid of how it would look for them to have this person, to help this person. And as a result of that, they dismissed him and they robbed themselves of an opportunity to do something great. At the end of the day, God doesn't value how we look that much. So the point is, though, we fear ramifications of what we do. If I help somebody, then they might do this. Or we look at it in terms of, are the kind of person that they are, and we judge them in that regard. To give a very specific example, I could use my brother because he is continuously one of the most difficult people. And, he's a strong believer in something that looks like Christianity. And he manifests that and pushes that forward as much as he can. And in the process, he's more than happy to step on the toes of every single person and leave just nothing but wreckage in his wake. My brother and I do not get along. And the thing is if I saw him needing help, there's a part of me that would still want to help him. Now the thing of it is, what runs through my mind immediately with this scenario is, well, is he going to be a better person to me, or is he going to turn around and hurt me again? He's going to turn around and hurt me again because that's what he's done for his whole life. His whole adult life, that's all he's done. Every time we've gotten close again, it's happened the same way again and again and again and again. So obviously I should cut that person out of my life. Obviously I should not help him when he needs help. Those aren't actually the same thing. The thing of it is that I could reach out and help him without actually saying, yeah, we're good now. I can happily help him and just be like, okay, I helped you, leave me alone. See, the thing about toxic people, like I've said before at different times in this group, is that you don't have to have them in your life. Just because you help somebody doesn't mean you have to now welcome them back. I don't know where we get that idea, honestly. But see, the thing about it in this particular instance is, where is my focus? See, if my focus is on me, that's not compassion, is it? If I'm focused on how he's going to affect me and that's what stops me, that's honestly kind of shitty. I'm going to leave this person to suffer because I'm worried that they're going to be mad to me in some way. Am I really that weak? Are we? Like, really? Helping somebody and making them a part of your life is not the same thing. And even though their gratitude, they might want to become part of it, you can still tell them no. It's not that complicated. It's not that hard. And the reality is that if it's what's important for your individual health, then it's important to maintain that. But part of maintaining your individual health is being given to those things where you do good things. So when you start shutting that off because you're going to try to protect yourself from something that you don't have to go through because of some perceived fear, some deep-seated anxious belief system, you're actually just setting yourself up for a kind of a vicious cycle where you kind of kick yourself for what you've done. And then what's worse is that person uses that, later on to prove why they're right to be a complete jackass to you. The point is, at the end of the day, helping people should be focused on the people. And if we're afraid of things, sometimes it's a good idea to look at why we're afraid. And a lot of people like to say that they're compassionate people, but they stop at the door because of these things. That's not really true then, is it? You're a scared person at that point. Some might even say a coward. Because we're afraid to help people. The same can be said when we talk about some of the other aspects of this. One of the other big things to talk about specifically is specific to the church. We talked a couple weeks ago about how dangerous it is for us to fall into states of stagnation. And one of the big causes of that is when we stop focusing on why we do the things that we do. So as followers of Jesus, when we're sitting in places where we're more focused on rules and laws and not why those rules and laws exist, then we start missing the point and we start then we start becoming the kinds of people that Jesus was preaching against. It's really common in the church to do this kind of thing. I'm not going to help this person because, they're a sinner. And I don't want to be seen interacting with that person. And you can insert whatever sin you want. I've heard over my time in the church, I'm not going to help them because they're gay. I'm not going to help them because they cheated on their wife at some point. They're an adulterer. I'm not going to help them because they had a divorce. I'm not going to help them because... fill in the blanks. They got married to a guy that the church didn't like.
Well, fuck them.
Exactly.
And they easily justify all this stuff. They'll grab scriptures and say, well, Jesus says. Actually, Jesus did not say that. Thank you. You're quoting Paul, and you're misquoting him at that. And it's asinine at the end of the day. We literally look at passages like all of Matthew 9, all of these things that Jesus does and says, we're willing to completely disregard that in order to follow this one piece that we didn't really pay attention to, but we're using it now. And on top of that, we're using it wrong so that we can justify stuff that Jesus himself talks about. It's funny because there's a whole passage where Jesus talks about Corban laws, because this is not new. using scripture to justify inhumane behavior is old. Jesus literally came up against it with the Jews when they caught his disciples eating with unclean hands. And he got after the Jews got after him about that. They're like, your disciples are eating with unclean hands. And Jesus is just like, and they were referring to a ceremonial washing process that they were supposed to do to make themselves clean before they ingested food. And Jesus just looked at them and he's like, what about your Corban laws? Corban laws were the kinds of things where people would take an estate, for example, and say, okay, this estate is mine, but if their parents came and asked them for help with money, maybe they needed a place to stay. So the person, what they would do is say, oh, my parents need help, but I don't want to give them this thing that would help them. Okay, I'm going to give it as though it was to God. It is Corban, which means it belongs to God. Therefore, I can't give it to my parents. So because this is now sacred, I can't help my parents with it. I guess I can't help them. It's trash, like it always has been. But we've done it forever and ever. And Jesus specifically brought that up and called the Jewish people on it. So it's been a thing, and it's never really been okay, but we keep doing it. And at some point, we have to start understanding that when Jesus says that all the laws and the prophets can be brought under the umbrella of, not in those words, obviously, of love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and likewise love your neighbor as yourself. It simplifies it pretty strongly. If you wouldn't do this to yourself, don't do it to somebody else. It's not that complicated. All those laws, all those other things, they came from that kind of mindset of just care about other people as much as you would care about yourself. And if you don't care about yourself, let's talk about that, because that's an issue too. But instead, we have lots of people who are trying to meet these quotas and standards, and in the process of that, they're happy to hurt other people as they try to achieve this goal. And what's frustrating about that too is, as they're trying to achieve that goal, they're actually in the process of doing the very things that would send them that would make them fail to achieve that goal. But because they have that goal in their heads and they're trying to get to it, it's almost like they're succeeding really hard at losing the game, as it were. So, you imagine a game of football. Don't know why we're going down this road. You imagine a game of football where basically where the team that's trying to win spends all of its time trying to gain yardage and gain yardage and gain yardage. And even though they're right at the line and all they need to do is throw it to make a pass to win the game, they keep going for yardage. And they keep getting pushed back, but they keep going for yardage again and again and again, because they think that's how they're going to get into the end zone. Even though the defense on the other team is full of gigantic men, and their offensive team is not, they still think they're going to do it that way. That's what so much of the church does. They exist in this state of constantly trying to gain and gain and gain and gain and gain favor with God, and they don't need to. They can literally just toss it to Him, and He's going to take care of it. And as a result, they don't see the people around them, and as a result of that, they hurt the people around them, and as a result of that, they end up losing in the end. They become the Pharisees. They become the people that Jesus spoke against. They became the people that God was constantly rebuking, even from the earliest books of the prophets. They took compassion and dismissed it in order to favor laws and value achievement, to look good as opposed to be good. And that's something that's very, very dangerous. Again, the fear of losing, the fear of going to hell, as it were, is what drives so many followers of Jesus to not help other people, which is bitterly ironic. So one of the things with all of this is talking about not only the value of compassion. See, again, like fear and compassion cannot exist together. Whether it's anxiety, whether it's doubt, whether it's insecurity, whether it's commitment to some goal that you think is going to help you, or trying to pander to some and win favor with somebody you already have favor from. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the core thing that stops us so often, and hurt is another one. There are a lot of people who refuse to help people because they themselves are hurt. They look at their pain and they refuse to look past it in order to see others for who they are. People hurt me, therefore I'm going to not care about them. Why? Because you're afraid of getting hurt again? And the irony is that their world becomes more and more isolated. It becomes quieter and smaller and smaller and smaller. And in that state, they find themselves more and more alone, which is just as damaging. So it's like this kind of thing where it's like, okay, my response to this is that I'm going to cut all the people out of my life in order to protect myself. I mean, what happens is, with that, then you have to take care of yourself in so many ways, and you find that there are ways that you can't. And you need help. And when you go for help, you're alone, and then you feel the weight of that loneliness, and it just becomes this spiral that you exist in. Or if you have to rely on like one or two people in your life and that's all you have, what happens when those one or two people can't help you? You're just there alone by yourself, stuck, abandoned, and hopeless. It's the same deal, and this is probably the most extreme of the kind of three-ish examples given, because it not only affects the people around you, but it affects you just as painfully. So it's a thing where in order to protect myself, I'm going to push the world away, and that's going to protect me, because pain is worse than anything that I could possibly experience out there. You push the good and the bad at the same time. Yes, there could be more bad people. Yes, there will be more bad people. There will always be bad people, just like there will always be good people. If your fear stops you from being a compassionate person and turns you to darkness, turns you to hardness, that's not good, that's not okay, that's not beneficial in any way, shape, or form. You can justify it, you can believe, you can spin it however you want, and you'll still be wrong, and you'll know it. And that's the painful thing about any kind of conversation about this. A lot of those cultures that devalued compassion came from that same kind of perspective. Somebody somewhere had an idea, and they thought it worked really well. And then they went out and presented that idea to other people, and they vibed with it because, yeah, I've been hurt by people too. People can't be trusted. People are bad. We're going to not care about people. Let the weak perish. it happens like this. That's kind of the natural spiral of things. At the end of the day, God built us to be tender. We're not strong, okay? In ways we are, but it's not the way that we like to think. It's not the ways that we project. It's not the ways that we try to adhere to. We are soft-skinned, physically weak beings that exist in a world, and we've been able to conquer it because of community more than anything else. If any individual person gets into a fight with a bear, they're probably going to lose. We didn't win, we didn't succeed as a species because we were strong. We succeeded as a species because a single bear against 5 or 6 people loses. At the end of the day, we need community in order to be human. And yeah, you got that one guy who tells that story about how they choked out a mountain lion, and that's really cool. Good for him. Go for round 2. We'll see what happens. It's one of those things, like, we just don't, especially in our culture where we really value individuality and really value so many different aspects of that, we incidentally start valuing solitude and individual prowess over anything else. And as a result, we can tend to lose sight of compassion. Like, I've heard people even complain that, like, capitalism lends to our lack of compassion as a society. And I would say that that's conflating 2 separate issues. Like, you can say, yeah, that one part of it can, but it doesn't necessarily need to. You can also build your wealth to help other people. You don't have to be greedy. Anyway, so these things where we would rather be in fear, how do we get out of that? Because sometimes it's not simple. It's not always a choice per se. What I mean by that is sometimes there are things that are more subconscious. If I've existed in a state where my worldview is predicated on my experience, then how am I supposed to see that I lack compassion and that fear is really the thing that's driving me to sit in that place? Because for me, that fear is all that I know. I've existed in a state where my experiences have all been extremely negative and dangerous, and as a result, I see people in this particular light. And now I'm being told by other people that maybe I should have more compassion on people. But, that doesn't mean that I need to help them, right? Like, there's totally all these justifications for why I shouldn't. See, sometimes what we need is other people's perspective on things to help us recognize it. And we need to listen to those other people. Because when we talk about different things, one example is like attachment types. For those familiar with attachment theory, there are 4 different types. There's secure, anxious, avoidant, and fearful. And each of these 4 types represents a way that people kind of interact in relationships. See, somebody that's kind of like raised with an anxious attachment type, they're not always going to recognize that that's what they're doing. So, in that case, and this is important because at the end of the day, when compassion starts focusing on you, it stops being compassion. And the other thing that can happen, so if there's one side where we might not help because we're afraid of what could happen, there's another side where we might choose to help somebody and then it can become something else. Suddenly it becomes about you again. Well, I help them, now they're supposed to treat me better. I help them, now I can expect them to be this. Or now I help them, and then it becomes, well, now we're going to have like a relationship or something. And I want that. There's a certain danger when we start conflating different things into just helping people, just being compassionate to other people. And I keep saying helping people, but being compassionate is bigger than that. It doesn't mean just helping out in a time of need. Sometimes it's just being there in a time of need. Sometimes it's just doing something. But one of the things that can happen is the focus can turn around. So it stops being about the other person and their benefit, and it starts being about what you can get. And you don't always recognize it. So the point that I was going to make with anxious attachment types is that they oftentimes can become really clingy and even obsessive at times, where they begin to fear the loss of that relationship or the loss of that person. So an avoid or a anxious type can easily come into a place where their compassion drives them to help this person, and so they do it. And maybe they become friends. Maybe they develop a relationship. And then, in the midst of helping that person, the danger comes in that they don't see it. They don't know any better in a lot of ways. But they start to become overly obsessive about the person or clingy about the person. So they start obsessing about how they might lose this person. I've even seen it in times where people have been in a state of like, well, okay, I'm helping this person. What happens when they don't need me anymore? And I've seen people literally sabotage other people who they were helping because they wanted them to need them forever. So they literally stopped helping the person, caused more problems in order to make it look like there were more problems happening, and then that person continued to need them. So they got to continue this thing and maintain that relationship. And the funny thing is like they didn't know it, they didn't recognize it, they didn't say to themselves, oh, I'm gonna trick him, I'm gonna screw him up. No, it was a subconscious act of sabotage derived from a subconscious need for this thing. That's where we need other people. Because when we talk about this and about the way that we need other people to help us see, we can talk about self-reflection and how that's kind of a way to recognize whether or not our intentions are really for the other person or not. But that doesn't always do the trick. When we're talking about things that are more subconscious, sometimes we need another voice to be like, yeah, actually you act like this. I feel like I act this way. In my head it's going like this. Yeah, that's not what's happening, man. Actually, you got super, super clingy and really drove her away. I was just trying to maintain our relationship. Yeah, I know, but if you saw what it looked like from an outside perspective as opposed to, just your way of what and being in your head, then you'd realize it was pretty bad. This is not an uncommon thing. So,
You're a YouTube star now.
It's like a little ball of smoke. Jingle your hearts.
Perfect timing.
so
Right?
perfect. Anyway.
It's great.
Anyway,
That was inspiring.
Anyway, the point I was getting to has been completely lost. Thank you for that. Obscure random dude in a robe. Anyway, overall the point is this, is that, right, looking at that anxious type, that's just an example, a template, if you will. And there are lots of different ways that can go. I've seen people who have had compassion move them and they've got an anxious type of attachment. So suddenly the person tries to thank them and they're just like, stop it. Because again, it becomes a personal thing. At the end of the day, it's important for us to show compassion, especially when we're moved. When you see something and it moves you, go with it. And yes, I understand there's a conversation to be had about boundaries, because that's extremely important. There are some types of people, back when we talked about spiritual offices, we talked about shepherds. And one of their pitfalls was boundaries. It's kind of like a personality type in a way. But the point is that they run into the problem where sometimes they're too compassionate. They want to help everybody. And they have to create boundaries in order to be healthy in the process of helping people. And that's not always an easy thing to lay out. But I believe that a simple answer to that and a simple kind of direction is if you're feeling overwhelmed, take a break and reevaluate things and ask for help in learning how to better create boundaries. Because at the end of the day, we have a lot of people who are able to help us, especially when we're in a community, especially like a church group like this. You have other people, one, who are interested in you and invested in you, and two, care enough to be there for you when you need help. And that's a value that we don't always have with all the other people in the world. So, compassion is a good thing. It's not something to be thrown away, ever, for any reason. And if fear stops you from being compassionate, one, have compassion on yourself for that particular flub up, and two, learn to overcome the fear. Reevaluate why you're afraid. Compassion shouldn't be nullified because we're afraid of something. And our true strength is learning to live without fear in this regard. Will it save you to not help that person because you're afraid of the thing? No. Will it harm you? Maybe. Especially in the long run. Oh, yeah. And especially if it becomes a kind of thing where you're afraid to look bad, or if you're even just doing it to prove something. So, we've seen that too, where compassion becomes a kind of like, what's the word? It becomes the kind of thing where you use it as a means to justify yourself in front of other people. So, yeah. So all of this to say, all this is to make the simple point that when we come to places where compassion is an option, it's best to take that option. It's best to be compassionate, because if something's moving you, it's going to be there. And not to be afraid and not to worry about how you're going to look. You need to not be in the equation. You need to take a step back from yourself and take a step forward in helping this other person or being there for this other person. And if you can't see them for who they are, if you can't value what compassion brings to the table, the elevation of others in community, just the joy of helping another person, there's something to be evaluated there. So, with that, and even then, like, there's some stuff that Dusty's got tonight to share pertaining to that particular aspect of things. So, we'll take a break until Dusty's ready.
Take it away!
It's recording and it's not looking
Don't mess it up.
at you, it's looking at me.
Just, we're not going to announce that it's Dusty that's talking right now or anything.
Yeah.
I could like try to mime her voice the whole
All the
time.
pressure's off you.
You
You've
could
got
introduce
this.
yourself and say your name is Heather.
I'm sure you're not going to stutter or mumble or anything.
I would be honored.
Okay. So this is like in pieces because other people are supposed to fill in the blanks, I suppose. So I have a lot of things that somehow all relate back to each other. And they all came very separately. But it does tie in, I feel, a great deal with the message. So, like, I think some of those pieces are already set in place. So, the original thing that I got was that there were these pieces on us that kind of like hang off of us that are unnatural, and they have to be maintained, which would be like the facades, which tend to be like illusions. And I also got this thing about a veil that is like that basically hangs over us, and it may look like really nice, you know, like really amazing and everything, but it hides like all of the raw, true pieces of our self and like our identities. It kind of helps, like, that's where like walls and masks come in. And sometimes after it comes off, like, your walls will start to fall. And that's like the only place where you'll be able to really start seeing who you really are. And other people too, like, because nobody's gonna be able to see you unless
Right.
that comes down and the veil is lifted. But those things too, like when you do have those like facades, they serve your comfort and not your growth.
Yeah.
And you pretty much, when you're living in that place, you become like a shadow of those like pieces. I can't really like put exactly what that one was. It's a shadow of something that's like false.
Right.
Like your false self.
It's the kind of thing where like when you create a false identity, because they're never complete. And that's one of the things that we run into all the time with so many people. And that's both in terms of what we deal with when we're looking at other people and what we deal with when we're looking at ourselves, is that we oftentimes focus on a certain specific element and then blow that out of proportion. So everything else that you are falls underneath the shadow of that thing. You know, when we're looking at other people, for example, we might see them as, you know, that person is a this. You know, we'll be polite and say like a carpenter, right? Or a garbage man or something like that. And they come with a whole identity that we apply to them.
Or even being a teacher.
Right.
Like there was definitely
Yeah.
an identity that just like goes with it.
Right. And everything else underneath that kind of falls by the wayside. So it all becomes focused on that one thing, and that's a facade, and that's the shadow that covers it.
Those things are like like facades are fed by like fear and pride and coping mechanisms and ego.
Can you say those again?
Fear, pride, coping mechanisms. And
Damn it,
ego.
Grant.
Fear, pride, coping mechanisms. And what?
Ego.
Okay.
And in that place, like, I think along with, okay, like on the, there's like a different part, like on the other side, there was this thing about, like, why can't we see other people past their brokenness?
Yeah.
And
It's twofold. Like, we don't see people past their brokenness because we tend to judge them by their brokenness. This person, you know, we look at somebody who's, even like we were talking about with, you know, an anxious attachment type, somebody might deem them crazy. So because of that, they look at that person and say they're crazy because they do these things. And then that judgment becomes its own, like, its own identity.
Mm-hmm.
And then we dismiss that person and judge them based on that. And in that regard, we're being a judge, which is a facade in and of itself, because that's not really fair. And two, we're judging them, even though we're wrong to do that, because they're not crazy.
Yeah.
There might be something that's damaged, but that's not it.
but we're just seeing like those damaged pieces, and we're not seeing like the true person,
Exactly.
and we're not focusing on like the good pieces, like the, well, yeah, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like the true pieces.
Yeah. You're not seeing your brother or your sister anymore. You're seeing some judgment of yours that you've created.
Applied to
Yeah.
different people.
Yeah.
So I have kind of a question, if I may. Part of the thing is, this whole message thing has been something I've been dealing with for a long time. Again, you mentioned before that pride is my sin. But one of the things is, there's a friend of mine that I've been venting to for a long time about, like, work, relationships, friendships, stuff, just kind of just venting my everything under the sun that I'm dealing with right now, and it's all kind of happening at once. And so one thing that she mentioned is, it seems like that I expect perfection, and there's times that and that kind of hit home, because I don't feel that I expect perfection. I feel like I am pretty patient, and I don't expect perfection, but I expect effort and and progress, and the desire for progress. It's kind of why I took the stance to deal with the whole issue I had before with the whole with Kevin and whatnot. Is, you know, I don't need you to be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but I expect progress. I expect effort. And those, like, again, the Pharisees and stuff that kind of look down their noses at somebody else is lesser than them. They think they've arrived.
Mm-hmm.
They think they're there, and they're wrong.
Mhm.
Who are flawed, who are trying, I have more respect for than those who, you know, look down on people and who are mean, who are assholes, who are this, that, and the other. And that's kind of where my hatred has in my despisement or despisery, whatever it's called. The act of despising somebody comes from, is that, like, you know, I have a heart for the broken and the weak and the people who are neglected. But those who are in power and abuse their power for the sake of other, at the expense of others,
Yeah.
is something that I can't respect. And I see a lot of that in society, and again, how we kind of idealize being this tall, dark, and brooding kind of guy. You know, with this Rorschach or Batman or
Darth Maul.
Rick Sanchez. You know, these kind of fuckers that they think they're these self-imposed geniuses, and they're assholes. They're broken. The people that idolize them are missing the fucking point. And that's the kind of people that I despise, because like, and I hate, because there's no reaching them. There's no like compassion doesn't reach them. They see your compassion as weakness. They abuse your compassion. They give them an inch, they take a mile, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm the kind of guy, I want to consider myself very compassionate, but with work, with certain things in life, I have been taken advantage of by people who are these people who see compassion as weakness, and like every fucking time, like clockwork, my efforts, my desire to please people has been abused, and it's never enough. And I'm tired of not being enough for anybody. And I've become jaded, it's become almost contagious, of where like I want to please, I just want to do a good job. I want to do my job and exceed expectations and do what I can to do to help people, whether it's at work, whether it's friendships, whether it's whatever, and it's never enough. And I'm tired of it.
Do you think you expect perfection, like, from yourself to some degree?
I don't know, to
Yeah.
be honest. Because actually, this is actually a pretty fun story. Is today at work, I had a talk with a work mentor of mine, Dustin, who we're kind of checking in about you know, some of my work frustrations, and he's helping me package some of my frustrations about work in a more positive light, you know, less, oh, we're fucked, more, oh, we're fucked, you know.
I actually get that.
I do too.
Great, yeah, awesome, yeah, sweet.
Just smile while you say it.
Just and it's been actually a good talk today we had. And I don't really want to go into details and stuff because it's nothing humor there. But part of my issue is giving myself space to be human.
Yeah.
And I've been in my job 4 months, and yeah, I'm newish, and I'm doing my job, and I'm capable, and they pick me for a reason, and this is the things that he's told me.
Mm-hmm.
And on the one hand, it's being proud of who you are, but also giving yourself space to grow.
Yeah.
And something that even he mentioned today was get your righteous anger aside, put it aside, and ask, don't tell,
Yeah.
because there may be a piece of the puzzle that you're missing. And that's one thing that today I told him is like, it seems like for me, when I take that humble stance and ask versus telling, people tend to abuse that and kind of like assume you're stupid, or assume that your kindness is weakness. Whereas for me, what I've noticed is like once I start pulling the dick out and being this righteous, angry person and being right, that's the wrong answer, because like people get turned off to it and they think you're part of the problem. They think that you're this complainer. Whereas if you try to seek an understanding, they see that as you don't yourself understand. You yourself don't know what you're talking about. You're asking questions not because like you're not capable, because like, oh well, how do I do this? And I'm trying to find that balance between the two.
Right.
And so this tonight definitely spoke to me in ways I didn't enjoy.
Oh.
didn't like. But I don't know where I'm going with this, but just it felt needed to be kind of to air this and to ask the question, because you guys know me better than I know me sometimes, and know certain perspectives that I might miss.
Yeah.
And part of the thing is, that I've realized is like, everyone's only as good as their team. This is kind of why I asked this question, to you guys, not just to show off. Hey, look at the things I'm dealing with. But like,
Right.
I trust y'all. You guys have my back, and I respect your insight. And maybe whoever's watching the video and stuff might also gain something from the struggle of sucking life's dick and kind of doing what you gotta do and humbling yourself in the face of your superiors or customers or family that you may despise and doesn't have your back or abuses you and stuff. How do you handle these people that you're obligated to like and to love, but you don't want to? But I'm not putting this the right way, and I'm feeling that my bias and my jadedness is kind of twisting what I heard versus what I want to hear. So maybe if we can kind of discuss that and your thoughts on that would be awesome.
Yeah.
It's like they don't see you, pretty much. Just like that can be hard to deal with. People that don't see you for who you are, don't look at you and like learn from you, spending time with you, who you are. That can be hard, and it can feel like a threat too.
The other big thing is, like I was saying in the message there, with compassion, it's not about you. Like in the full length of things that you said, you talk about how you've been taken advantage of, you've been used, you've had people,
Right.
Utilize that. And for those people who do that, reaching out to help somebody doesn't mean dictating their progress or how they function after. And even to the point, were you a worse person because you helped them and they took advantage? How does that reflect on you as a person? It doesn't actually. We have a lot of people in our culture who like to stand up and say, well, that makes you weak. If they took advantage of you, it's because you were weak.
Yeah.
And that's not true.
People worry about that all the time.
One of the things that, I've been in the same boat many times, and even now, there are people where I see them and I'm just like, I'll tell them point blank, I'm like, I'm gonna help you out. I know that you might try to take advantage of the situation. I know that you might try to do this, or you might try to use this in some way. I'm helping you because because I care about you. If you take advantage of this, that's on you.
Yeah.
He tells me that all the time.
Really?
He does.
No, I actually have said that to Jeremy a few times about different things.
All right.
So it's
He
not.
knows I'm gonna get him. But he's a good person.
One day.
Yeah. So there are plenty of situations. There's nothing wrong with that. Even being for you as a person, we talked about how the need to kind of cultivate that person that's able to speak up in particular situations. That's part of it. Even just communicating to those people, you're that certain character type, that trope, you're Rick Sanchez's, so to speak.
Right.
Anyway, it's the kind of deal where yeah, fine, you're gonna do your thing. I'm gonna help you because obviously whatever's going on with you that would make you into that person is probably your own jadedness, your own brokenness, whatever.
Right.
That's your problem to carry, not mine. I'm helping you because I'm choosing to help you. I'm helping you because I feel the need to do it. And that's what's important. You mentioned your work thing where you can't speak to them, you can't be hard, because that gets you in hot water. And when you be the humble person that you're being asked to, it's like they think they disregard you and think like you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
Well, we could look for a balance between those two things, and that's fair, but really, where do you feel happiest? Where do you feel like the best person sitting in between those two? And that's really the thing to deal with, because there's no clear answer right away. Like, not without like sitting down and picking apart your every
Right.
interaction and that whole thing.
In the moment, like, hey, what feels right?
Right.
Okay.
And
What gives you peace?
yeah. And sometimes what feels right and what ends up leaving you at peace aren't always the same thing.
Right.
Sometimes you might think that the best course of action is to like bring the hellfire and brimstone, and in reality, it's just going to make you feel worse after.
And that's what my mentor was saying, is like, yeah, righteous anger is a hell of a drug, and it feels good, and it feels, it's definitely fun in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but it may turn someone off to your message.
Yep.
And that's one thing that I try to be conscious of, and why I like to sound, to bring people into my mess,
Mhm.
not to make it their problem, because like, hey, I know I need help. I know I need other eyes on the things. If I don't let people I care about keep me humble, keep me on task, I will become this vindictive, righteous asshole that I don't want to be.
Yeah.
And so that's where, where Dustin, where this group comes into, is that, like, hey, listen, like, y'all keep me humble, because pride is my sin, like, and that's why I ask questions that I do. Because, yo, what's up? Have a good night.
So, even with that, there's like one thing, and I think it's probably one of the worst things to run into is when you like go the righteous anger route because you've judged the situation to be a certain way. And then you come to find out that in fact your judgment was off, and you've effectively unloaded, your righteous anger on a misunderstanding or an innocent person. And that's a bad place to be. Like, that feels super bad, to say the least. And it's one of those things. It's why we try to like gauge this stuff so we avoid that kind of like misunderstanding or yeah. But it's one of those deals. Again, though, with compassion. Compassion isn't about you. It's about the people around you. And that ends up needing to be the focus. It's one of those times where, talking about humility and pride and that whole thing, like I said at the very, very end here, for compassion, you need to step back from this equation, and you need to put them forward. And that's all. Like I said with my brother, if he needed help tomorrow, I'd probably help him, but I wouldn't call him afterwards or go set things up to hang out. I might accept his gratitude or whatever, assuming he even said thank you, because that doesn't usually happen. But it would be the kind of thing where it's like, look, you're a shitty person, but I'm helping you anyways, because I'm not a shitty person. And I'm not going to allow your shittiness to dictate my person, my character.
I'm above
We
you,
can
damn
say
it.
that, right?
Interesting.
We can totally get away with saying that too, right?
Why
Oh, yeah.
wouldn't you?
Yes. That
Why-
makes this so much easier now.
Like,
As long as I can establish
It's
you're
gonna
an
sound
asshole,
so
I'm
good.
gonna help you. But you're establish.
Because I'm
You're
not
an
a
asshole.
shitty person.
I love this.
I don't know why like everybody's so weird about things like that. You can communicate. We've developed this thing called
just changed my
communication
entire
for a
perspective on this.
purpose. It's like everybody like, God, they like ghost or they hide or whatever, or they dance around
Right?
the issue. Nobody's blunt. Like, it's really easy.
So the entire time I'm telling you, be like, you're an asshole. I think you're a piece of shit.
I don't like you, but I'm going to help you.
the entire time helping them move, like you're a piece of shit, and carrying stuff around. Oh my god.
That's just vindictive, and you
Damn
know
it.
that. You know that, Jeremy. Stop it.
Play in the field, all right.
Mhm. Where do you want this box, asshole? Yes. This could be like the most enjoyable move out experience. Helping somebody.
Yeah, I mean, if it's kind of like thinking about developing yourself. Like ways that you can develop yourself or become like a stronger person, or, you know, when you step out in compassion. Treat people that maybe they treat other people in an inhumane way, but treat them as a human. And that's going to strengthen you.
Yeah.
No matter how they like receive it, or, you know, what their reaction is to